Upon realizing that I've become the beta of the Moon River Pack, I feel both daunted and thrilled. But when my old crush, Elise, tries to get close to me, my heart only belongs to the mate destined by the Moon Goddess. Loyal to her gift, I cannot be swayed, no matter how irresistible Elise's charm is. Welcome to the Alpha's Love channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Chapter 17 Relationship Redux. Olwen checked the mirror one last time, making sure everything was in order before going to spray on some perfume. She hadn't felt this nervous in years, not even her first date with Aaron had been this nerve-wracking. Though Landon had clearly voiced his interest in her when she'd first arrived at Pack Borders, when they'd started out there was no fated mate bond tying them together. The attraction and depth of their relationship had naturally blossomed as time went by, and for some reason, with it so did their strange connection. Olwen had been taken aback this morning when Landon came to see her and ask her out of their first actual date, but after inhaling his scent up close following a week of a lack of physical proximity with the Alpha, she'd had to spend the next 2 hours calming a rather excited and oddly desperate Opal down. "This is just our first date," Olwen sternly reprimanded her wolf as she waited at the front porch of her home for Landon. "We are not serious yet, so don't try anything and make me lock your consciousness away for the night." She didn't want to threaten Opal so harshly, but after 2 hours of being sent a barrage of explicit thoughts and images, Olwen just had to put her foot down. "Sorry," Opal whined, not sounding sorry at all. Olwen sighed, adjusting her clothes one final time. She was wearing a denim dress with a brown belt and simple lavender sneakers, and a pair of small crystal studs as earrings. Her brown hair was tied into a high ponytail. The moment Landon's scent reached her nose, Opal sprung up, howling for a second before she remembered Olwen's warning and begrudgingly quieted down. Olwen smiled and stepped off her porch as the Alpha approached. Affection bubbled up at the sight before her. He was dressed in a black button-up and jeans, his messier blonde hair lightly combed. One of his hands was hiding behind his back as he stopped a respectable distance from her on the grass. "Good evening, Olwen. Are you ready for our date?" "Yes." Olwen managed a nod, her eyelashes fluttering as that forest after rain smell nearly swallowed up all her senses. Landon nodded in return, and for a brief second Olwen thought she saw him bite his lip, as his eyes flashed yellow before he kept talking. "I dropped by Jackson's shop and bought this for you." He produced a small bouquet of fresh pink buttercups, and Olwen's mouth dropped. "These are beautiful. Why haven't I seen these? I might have requested them from him specially for tonight," Landon admitted, gently handing her the flowers. "I have been working up the courage to ask you to dinner for weeks. I just was waiting for the right time." "You didn't need to, but thank you," Olwen murmured. She clutched the bouquet in her hands and smiled at Landon. "I wanted to," the Alpha assured her simply, offering her his arm and waggling his eyebrows playfully. "Shall we?" Chuckling at his antics, Olwen linked her arm through his, holding on to the buttercup bouquet with her other, as they headed to the nearby Pack restaurant. Once they had arrived, Landon went straight to the front counter, where the waiter bowed. "Alpha. Your reservation for 6:30, right?" "Yes, thank you, Cedric." The waiter glanced at Olwen and gave her a respectful nod. "Miss? You and the Alpha, come this way please." Olwen felt her cheeks flush slightly at the amount of eyes on her as she and Landon were taken up the stairs to a table at the balcony, overlooking the Moon River Pack. "Please take your time and look at the menu. I will be back shortly to take your order." Cedric handed over 2 copies of said menu and bowed again, before heading away for the time being. Olwen glanced up at the night sky above them, before turning to stare at the many houses and buildings and Pack members dotted in the far distance from where they were. "Wow! Nice view." "I figured so," Landon replied, gazing at her. "In a way, we are also commemorating the day we met, at the Evergreen Pack's function." Our first conversation at the balcony, remember? Yeah, I remember. Cedric returned moments later to take their orders. A chicken Alfredo with clam chowder, and a garden salad for Landon, and an aglio olio with tomato soup, and a fruit salad for Olwen. Once he'd headed off to pass this on to the kitchen, Olwen turned back to her date. I didn't ask this earlier, but what made you like me so quickly at the function? Landon thought about this for a brief moment before he answered her. Truthfully, you were like a breath of fresh air. Every other person I met with that night felt as if they were trying too hard to impress me, and I couldn't even tell if they actually did like me, or were just doing it because of my alpha status, and because their parents were pushing for some kind of union. I went to the balcony for a break from all that, and that's the first time I saw you. He had a fond, wistful smile on his face. Your scent was soothing, almost like a healing balm after the long night I'd had. And when you assured me I wasn't doing the wrong thing for pushing away others' attempts to set me up, I knew you were being genuine. Even though you knew who I was, you didn't try too hard or put up a false front like the Alphas and Lunas, you were just you. Olwen gaped at him with a tint of pink on her cheeks. You remember all that about me? Landon shrugged, bashful as he sipped at some of the water the waiter had brought them earlier. I thought I'd forgotten about you after I realized you were Aaron's mate. But that day when I found you outside the pack borders, the moment your scent reached me, it was like the memory of that night was pulled out of the depths of my brain. He enunciated to the best of his ability. That's an interesting way to put it. Olwen remarked. I thought that maybe I'd change my mind after I ran into you again. Landon confessed, reaching over and lightly placing his hand over hers. But it only got worse. He didn't give her any room to say anything before he pressed on. I admired your strength, not accepting your ex-mate's bullcrap, cutting ties with your home pack, and managing to survive as a rogue even though you'd never really prepared for it. His voice came out in a rush. And even though you were once going to become a Luna, and came from the strongest pack in the forest, you never once looked down on others. You've been kind, hardworking and devoted even though you're new to the Moon River pack, and especially after you got back into all the hobbies you love, you just seem more energetic and passionate every time I see you. By the time he was finished, Olwen realized her mouth was still partly open. Wow. I've wanted to say all that to you for a while, but I didn't want to scare you away. Landon muttered, blushing and running a hand through his hair. But I have to be upfront now, I really like you, Olwen. The woman thanked the moon goddess that their table was situated far away from others, or they would have seen the way she was practically burning from all of the Alpha's words. Well, firstly, my ex was never honest with me, so your directness is a nice change. Olwen started. And secondly, now I feel a little bad. You make me sound like an angel. You may as well be one. Landon said without missing a beat, his hand still on top of hers. The fact that you came from a pack all the way at the other side of the evergreen wilds, it's like the moon goddess guided you to me. Olwen felt her heart speed up as she moved her hand to properly clasp his. You sure you're not the moon goddess blessing to me instead? She found the words slipping out of her mouth naturally, and instantly Landon's face grew just as red. Where the heck did that come from? Olwen never considered herself a flirt. Even with Aaron, she was more on the receiving end of his compliments than the sender. That's up for debate then. Landon managed, his blue eyes flickering down to their joined hands. Olwen could feel her heartbeat speeding up even more, as she felt the way his fingers slotted just nicely in between hers. Of course, Cedric chose now to return with their food, and the pair had to withdraw their hands as their orders were effortlessly arranged on the table in between them. Both thanked the waiter before he left, and the next 30 to 40 minutes or so were spent with the quiet clinking of metal cutlery. After hearing Stella's concerns about the new leadership of your former pack, I've been keeping an eye out for news. Landon spoke somewhere at the 40-minute mark. According to Alpha Silas from the Fireclaw pack, the nearest to them, the Silver Arrow Pack, is in no shape to hold the function this year. Olwen raised an eyebrow at the Alpha. Okay, how reliable is that piece of information? It's just hearsay at the moment. Landon clarified. But updates from the Silver Arrow Pack have kind of been silent for a while. The last official one from them was about the appointment of the new Alpha and Luna, and that was months ago. Olwen thought about this for a moment before it dawned on her. But if the Silver Arrow Pack can't hold the pack's function this year then as the second strongest pack in the wilds, the Moon River Pack will be holding it. Landon confirmed, nodding as he twirled some spaghetti on his fork. So chances are, Alpha Aaron and Luna Kylie will come to know you. Stela and her family are here with us. Olwen felt her throat suddenly go dry, and she swallowed thickly. I haven't seen them since I rejected Aaron and left the Silver Arrow Pack. Will you be all right? The Alpha looked at her with concern evident on his face. I don't have to mention anything about you staying here to anyone, and you can just know. Olwen interrupted firmly. If any of them see me, I'll be fine with it. I need to well and truly leave my past in my old pack behind, not run from it. Landon looked as if he might argue, but his indignant expression softened at the resolve he saw in her eyes. Okay. As they ate, he quietly placed his hand on her wrist to draw her attention back to him briefly. Whatever happens once they find out you're here, I'll make sure you and your friends are safe. I know you can take care of yourself, but you can rely on my protection anyways. Thank you, Alpha Landon. Olwen gave him a grateful smile, and then frowned as she realized a piece of garlic was stuck to her lower lip. After a fulfilling meal, Alpha Landon walked Olwen back to her home, the both of them talking about the state of the plants around. There was a prediction that there would be a heat wave upon the packs in the latter half of the year, and thanks to preliminary discussions amongst the higher-ups, food had already begun being stored. Olwen could feel Landon very lightly grasping her hip as they walked, but she didn't mind. It felt comforting and right, and it also helped that the slight physical contact kept Opal happily purring inside her. She was still holding the bouquet of buttercups he'd given her at the start. According to what the Alpha had told her over dessert, buttercups, or their scientific name ranunculus, symbolized charm. So in essence, by gifting her those flowers, Landon was saying he was charmed by her. I enjoyed our date, she said softly, as her house drew nearer. Me too. Landon smiled back, his shoulders relaxed. He had paused before adding, if I were to ask you out on a date the next time I'm free, would you be willing to accept once again? Olwen did not hesitate to nod. Absolutely. The Alpha released a soft sigh of relief, as he led her to her front door. Here we are, get some rest. I know you have training with Delta Cassidy tomorrow. Olwen nodded, standing in her doorway and facing Landon. That I do. Stela and Kale will be joining us too. Good to hear. The Alpha grinned at her. Have a lovely night, Alpha Landon. You too, Olwen. He made to turn and leave, but Olwen grasped his arm and guided him back to face her. Wait, I should thank you on taking me out on such a nice date. Olwen headed to the side of her porch and brought back a small stool. Standing on top of it placed her at the same level as the taller Alpha. The surprise registered in his eyes as she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't as passionate, or as desperate, as the one they'd had in the training center had been, but it was enough to send sparks of warmth through Olwen's body, even more so when she felt Landon kiss her back. Remind me to take you out on dates just as nice, if not nicer, than this one. Landon murmured into her ear before pulling away. I will. He cast one more longing look over his shoulder, and Olwen waved him off. His perfect, Opal gushed, wagging her tail. Such a strong, handsome and caring Alpha. Both Landon and Lark. Opal hadn't met with Lark or Landon since her initiation. Though not as wild as earlier, she was still sending particular messages into Olwen's mind, making her blush and quickly head back into the house. Landon's words from earlier still echoed in her head, making her want to cover her face even though no one was around to witness her embarrassment. With both of her children on the way back to the house, Sylvie sat by the window with a mug of cocoa. The window was ajar and facing the quiet night scenery of the Moon River Pack, a soft breeze blowing in and lightly caressing the older woman's face. While Stela and Kale settling down with their mates weren't something she had pushed for or emphasized on throughout their life, witnessing them together with their other halves was more than heartwarming for their mother, who adored them more than anything else and wished for their happiness. Stela hadn't voiced any intention yet, but given how close she was becoming to Beta Elijah, and how well they were getting along, Sylvie expected her eldest daughter to begin discussing moving in with her mate in a few months. And Kale she was going to meet Gamma Josh the following day. She hadn't seen or talked to him for very long in comparison to Elijah, but from the sound of things so far, Kale was more at ease with him than most of the people on the Silver Arrow Pack. While Olwen was not her biological daughter, Sylvie felt the same joy and pride that a mother would upon seeing how well she was doing for herself in her new pack. The stormy, heartbroken expression the younger woman had worn on her face the day she left the Silver Arrow Pack had haunted Sylvie's mind for days, and she had prayed to the moon goddess to spare Olwen from further suffering. She had been surprised to learn of the Omega's gradually blooming relationship with Alpha Landon, but taking one glance at how the pair interacted with each other was all she needed to be assured that the she-wolf was in good hands. Sylvie was suddenly pulled out from her thoughts by her phone vibrating. She glanced down, her breath catching in her throat when she saw the caller ID as hubby. Within her, Soren whined a little at the memory of their mate, but Sylvie resolutely went against the impulses of her wolf and declined the call. Chapter 18 Separation 2 months ago. Once the dagger was used to slice their palms, the now former Alpha Bradley stepped back and gestured for both Aaron and Kylie to turn to the rest of the Silver Arrow Pack. I now give you, Alpha Aaron Young and Luna Kylie Young of the Silver Arrow Pack. They had completed the marking before the leadership of the pack was passed to them officially, and Aaron's mark was displayed proudly on Kylie's slender neck, the same way hers was on his. Kylie was smiling broadly, grasping Aaron's wrist with her uninjured hand, as she faced the crowd that had gathered to witness their ascension. Aaron had the same smile, but it soon became strained as he took a good look at the audience in front of him. Once the ceremony had formally concluded, the now Luna Kylie planted an affectionate kiss on Aaron's cheek and went off to celebrate her new role with a group of friends, and Alpha Aaron went to talk to his father. Is it just me, or did the hall look emptier than it was supposed to be? He asked in a hushed tone, seeing the stoic expression on Bradley's face slowly show a scowl as the people dispersed. The older man called over one of their pack members, who had been put in charge of recording attendance. You? How many attendees were missing from the ceremonies? Swallowing, the young man flipped through a bunch of papers on his clipboard. Judging from the amount of names, it would amount to a third of the pack. Glancing at the anger that showed in Bradley's face, Alpha Aaron gestured for the man to hand over the clipboard, and then dismissed him with a harsh flick of his hand. I'll get to the bottom of this, Dad. Aaron assured his father firmly, already on his way out of the hall. Present day. So apparently the third of the pack members had a valid reason for not being able to attend the new leadership ceremonies. They'd consumed a batch of expired food and come down with food poisoning that very morning. It seemed too coincidental to be true, but despite Alpha Aaron's insistence at having the source of the affected food being traced, they had come up short. Unable to accept this, Bradley had attempted to attack some of the wolves who had skipped out on the ceremony, and each time Alpha Aaron had to hold his own father back and remind him that causing casualties amongst the Silver Arrow Pack was not a good idea at this point. After all, Aaron had assumed the Alpha post at a particularly bad time. After the stunt Stela and Kale had pulled, his father had again threatened disciplinary action on the pack if they speculated any further on the emails. Not that it made things any better. Even without mentioning the incident, the atmosphere in the Silver Arrow pack had changed. Kyla's reaction to the emails had been to stay in her room for 3 days straight, after which she came out with puffy eyes. Unlike before, no one aside from Aaron, Bradley and a number of close friends gave her the time of day for a pity party. And as many expected, Kyla's faux tears dried up like a well in a drought as her lunar ceremony drew near. While Delta Jace and Gamma Edric had carried on as per normal and fulfilled their duties in the pack, things outside of that were nonetheless strained. Delta Jace's mate had just recently given birth to a child, and he declined to have a baby shower open to the other pack members just so his newborn son wouldn't be around the quick-tempered new Luna, and he wasn't the only one giving Kylie a wide berth. Gamma Edric was able to hold his tongue regarding Alpha Aaron and Luna Kylie a little better, but he'd been among the third of the pack who supposedly came down with food poisoning before the ceremony, and then promptly made himself scarce for the next week with further complications brought on by said food poisoning. Beta Caden was obliged to hold onto his role indefinitely due to his immediate family's absence, but he was the Beta in only name now. He was always checked out in pack conferences, and when interacting with other pack members, and even during border patrols, as hard as he tried, he had difficulties shifting. It was very fortunate that there were no imminent attacks from other packs or rogues, or he would have been taken out far too quickly. All that paled in comparison to what was happening to Alpha Aaron. Even after suffering from Olwen's rejection, Az just refused to budge. Aaron could run just fine by himself, but alongside Kylie. Not a chance. Az found a way to snap his jaws at Kira, and always took off to some other area in the Silver Arrow pack by himself. By the time Aaron got back his control, he was in different locales. Once it was a pond, and then a pile of leaves. It never stayed the same. It was so bad that Aaron still had to drug his wolf whenever he was intimate with Kylie, and that included during and after the marking ceremony, since Az vehemently resisted from marking a she-wolf that was not Olwen or Opal. When Aaron had stirred awake the morning after the ceremonies, lying bare in bed next to Kylie, her scent of green apples immediately permeated his wolf's nose. The next thing Aaron knew was his hands suddenly wrapping around Kylie's throat, causing the she-wolf to startle awake and have to gasp for air moments later, when Aaron wrestled his consciousness back from Az. Sputtering out some apologies to an infuriated Kylie, Aaron had stumbled out of bed still locked in a fight with his own equally angry wolf. Az? What the fuck was that for? You almost killed the Luna and our mate. Kylie is not our mate. Az growled repulsively from within, baring his teeth. I want Olwen. Olwen is gone. She rejected us. She rejected us because of you. Az snarled, attempting to take control of Aaron's body once again, so that he could smack some sense into his human with the help of the nearby wall. It's all your fault. Az, if you make things any more difficult for me, I'm going to have to keep sedating you. Do it then. The wolf barked aggressively. I'll keep making things worse. I'll never let you be happy with Kylie. It had been 3 months since the ceremonies, and even now Alpha Aaron kept the discord between him and his wolf hidden from everyone aside from his father and his mate. And the only way to do this was to keep drugging Az. From the cases he'd heard, wolves who underwent rejections from their fated mates would pine for a few more days at most, and by the time one found their chosen mate, their wolf would have to accept it one way or another if their human was happy. Unless it was Az, apparently. Get your wolf under control. Bradley reprimanded Alpha Aaron in his office. I'm trying. Aaron hissed, slamming his hands on the desk. Az isn't listening to me at all. I told you the drug had a major side effect. His father scoffed, thrusting the canister in his face. You can't expect to numb your own wolf without any consequences. Indeed, the label warned in fine print that after consumption, wolves could become more difficult to restrain and control when not under the influence of the drug. In addition, stronger wolves in particular could develop a resistance to it the more it was used. It's just until ours gets used to Kylie and Kira. Aaron said stubbornly. What if he never accepts them as his mate? Bradley questioned, crossing his arms. When you first shifted, I told you ours would be a handful. He will have to accept her. Aaron repeated, his face flushing with indignation, as he stood up, glaring at his father. Just give me time. You'd better do this, son. Bradley warned, his gaze fiery. Sooner or later, the pack will notice if you have to keep suppressing ours, and then word will spread to the other packs in the wilds. He turned away with a huff. If Olwen had just agreed to a peaceful rejection, then ours wouldn't be acting up. Don't you dare insult my mate. Ours surged to the front of Aaron's consciousness, and he almost shifted and lunged at his own father. Despite being retired now, Bradley easily blocked off his son and held him down until Aaron was able to wrench back control. The reputation of the Silver Arrow Pack is already on the line thanks to the actions of your ex-mate and Caden's daughter. Bradley snarled down at Aaron. Don't add on to that. Aaron got back up, shoving ours to the back of his mind and locking him there as punishment. Ours had always been the type to act before thinking, and so he trained himself early on to mentally lock away his wolf in case of emergency. It usually worked, understood father, but I'm the alpha now. I'll take care of this. Just as he was pacing back and forth, Kylie's voice, soft and seductive, echoed through his mind link. Alpha, come back home, I have a surprise for you. It was a pity that Oz refused to be with anyone else but Olwen, because Kylie was like a goddess in bed. Just hearing her voice like that, along with some very pleasant images, made Aaron smirk, and he began to step out of his office. He had just made it past the door, when he found his feet being held in place. Don't you fucking dare. Oz snarled in his mind. He was still under the lock, hence only being able to gain control over Aaron's feet, but the fact that he was able to gain any control over his body at all was worrisome. Frowning, Alpha Aaron wrenched the drugs from his pocket, and downed another dose of the substances, and just as he'd hoped his wolf's presence soon fell silent. The walk back to his home was quick and peaceful, the breeze ruffling Aaron's pale brown hair. As he entered his home, the scent of green apples wafted out of their bedroom, and he wasted no time in striding up the stairs and opening the door with a cocky grin. Hello there, baby doll. Aaron. Kylie lay in the sheets without clothes, giving him a sultry look that could turn any man's insides to jelly. She raised one finger and crooked it, and instantly Aaron climbed on top of her and crushed their lips together. The next half an hour went by in a rush, Aaron's clothes carelessly disposed of as he once again indulged in his desires with his chosen mate. Though the thrill of it had evaporated after Olwen caught them in bed together, it didn't subtract from how much both of them enjoyed it before today, at least. Aaron stared into Kylie's bewitching amber eyes as they moved together, both approaching their limits at the same time. And then, right as Aaron was teetering on that edge, a face he had tried not to think about for months was suddenly pushed to the forefront of his mind. A certain brunette, her body flushed beneath his, her grey eyes gazing up at him with nothing but love and adoration. Before Aaron had the sense to register what was happening, he let out a loud roar as he finished. Olwen. The usual dazed but satisfied exhaustion he experienced after an encounter was promptly shattered as Kylie slapped him in the face. Hard. What is wrong with you? She shrieked, her face flushed with fury and humiliation. Aaron tried to catch his breath, and had to clamber off the bed, as Kylie tried hitting him again. I am sorry. I think my wolf was trying to get out. Kylie screamed, hurling a pillow at him. Aaron had no choice but to gather his clothes and scramble out of the bedroom, uttering some further awkward apologies towards the irate woman, as she cursed out both him and his wolf. I told you I wouldn't let you be happy with her, didn't I? Arz's taunting growl came from inside his head as Aaron fumbled to redress himself, still in shock over what he had just done. The door slammed shut behind him. That was too much. You know that Olwen's a sore spot for Kylie. Not my mate, not my problem. Snorted. Aaron groaned and sank to the ground, rubbing his face where his mate had slapped him just moments before. Being at the receiving end of one of Kylie's so-called attacks was not fun. And since when had recovered from the effects of the drugs so quickly? The new Alpha was now feeling more and more inadequate by the day. What kind of leader was he of the Silver Arrow Pack, if he couldn't even control his own wolf? Alphas and their wolves especially had to be in sync, and fighting this much with your wolf was unheard of. Aaron buried his head in his hands, letting the frustrations bubble up in him. He would likely have to spend the night and several more on the couch, all while trying to explain to Luna Kylie that he hadn't been in the right state of mind when he'd called out the name of his ex-mate at the height of their intimacy. Why had the moon goddess decided to play such a cruel trick on him and give him an Omega as his fated mate? Throughout the history of the Silver Arrow Pack, none of their alphas had ever been tied to an Omega, not like the other packs beneath them were. It was why they were the strongest, because the Luna was able to be a natural leader of the pack without having to be coddled by those she was meant to protect. If Olwen had been anything other than an Omega, he wouldn't have been put off by her, and he wouldn't have started seeing Kylie behind her BA. You are unbelievable. Growled. Some alpha you are. For the sake of the Silver Arrow Pack, at least pretend to tolerate me. I can't be seen disagreeing with my wolf in public. Coward. Responded, snarling once again, as his fur bristled. You do disagree with me. You can't accept the fact that you hurt our mate, and that all this is on you. For the final time, Olwen is not our mate anymore. She's not even a part of the pack, and she may not even be alive. You think so little of her and Opal. Sneered bitterly. Stop thinking about Olwen, Aaron argued with him. Stop making me think about Olwen. No. You deserve to suffer for what you did to her. Huffed apathetically. As long as you keep sleeping with that cold-hearted bitch, you will only think of and see Olwen. Aaron felt his knuckles turning white, as he balled a fist from the agitation. There was only one solution to his: he couldn't be intimate with Luna Kylie, at least for the time being. Until he could find some way to placate his wolf. And from the angry scream and the sound of something shattering in the bedroom near him, it wouldn't be difficult to stay away. The Beta house was deadly quiet, as it had been for the past few months or so. Beta Caden was slumped in front of the television, as the sports channel droned on in front of him. He usually was interested in whatever sport they were reporting on, but nothing was going in these days. Corson was still whining, the wolf mentally slumped over with sorrow and agony. He couldn't feel their mate or children close by, after so many years of being together, and he refused to come out and do his job. The man himself was clutching a dress that Sylvie had left behind. It had still radiated of her lovely scent for the first few weeks, but now there was barely a wisp of it left, and it provided no comfort. Beta Caden had tried to justify himself at first, that he was being loyal to the Alpha, who he had grown up with and sworn allegiance to, but Sylvie was his mate, and Stella and Kale were their flesh and red water. He should have listened, told them what they needed to know. Their expressions of shock and disappointment that day when they'd cut ties with the pack continued to haunt him even now. And he had no idea where his family was. His first few calls to his wife were declined before she full out just decided to block his number. He wished he could just search for them, but he had no idea where to start. And with the state of the Silver Arrow Pack, from the lack of respect for the new Alpha and Luna, and the couple's visibly strained relationship, he needed to stay behind. It was as if any moment now, he could turn his back for 1 second, and the pack would collapse from the inside. Chapter 19 Tethered 12 Dates. That was how many Alpha Landon had taken Olwen on by the time another month had passed. Each one varied in time and location. After all, it depended heavily on both their availability. Alpha Landon was still rather preoccupied with pack matters, and Olwen was juggling training and spending some time with her friends. But they shared a common feature, that both Landon and Olwen made it work, and they were both enjoying everything they'd done together so far. They'd gone for a picnic near the river, had lunch together at the Alpha's home, and gone for a tea break at the bakery, which also meant having to have Elijah's parents third-wheeling their date. The pair had even sparred again in the training center, and Olwen was proud to recount to Stela that she'd been able to catch the Alpha off guard and knock him face down onto the mat. Speaking of which, Stela and Kale had begun their training with Cassidy as well. Despite Kale's previous lack of interest in training to fight, Alpha Landon and Beta Elijah had assured him that the training was necessary for every member of the pack, and that he would not be judged based on his skill level. The high-ups made it clear anyways that programming and tech was what they needed Kale's assistance in over anything else. There were a number of menial processes the Moon River pack undertook which could use streamlining. So if Kale wasn't on dates with Gamma Josh, they'd made their relationship public a few days after Olwen's first date with Landon or training. He would be working on programs that the pack would be able to use in the future, much to his pleasure. Since Stela had practically scared the Omega away from her mate, Elise hadn't been giving them any problems. She was still around the Moon River pack, if not examining the various dresses and accessories at the boutique, then she was speaking with some of the unmated wolves. Olwen hoped that the she-wolf would find her footing one day, and not spend the rest of her life chasing after others. Olwen awoke with a start, yawning as her alarm went off. She glanced at her phone on the bedside table, seeing a message come in just minutes later. Happy 1-month anniversary. I told you I would be taking you on a much more interesting date since it's one of the longest openings I have, right? So that meant leaving both today and tomorrow open. Get dressed, eat your breakfast, do whatever you need to do before you come and meet me. I'll be outside your home waiting in about an hour. I hope this isn't too bold of me to ask, but Stela will be dropping by your home soon with a dress. I had her help in picking it out, and I hope it's to your liking. Olwen blushed deeply, and with Opal howling excitedly and wagging her tail, she climbed out of bed and began to get ready. She had no idea what Alpha Landon had planned, but a few days before the only hint he had given her was to pack a small suitcase for a one-night stay elsewhere. The doorbell rang about 10 minutes later, to Stela and surprisingly, Beta Elijah both there. Good morning, Olwen. Stela waggled her eyebrows at her friend teasingly, handing over a soft, pastel-colored floral dress. Just to preempt, if the dress isn't your thing then that's my fault. No, the dress looks great, I love it. Olwen assured her, accepting the outfit with a smile. I'm just surprised that you and your mate good morning, Beta, she nodded at Elijah. Came here together. Are you two going somewhere? Actually, since I came here to pass you this dress, I also wanted to tell you that Eli and I were talking, and Stela rubbed the back of her neck and smiled shyly. I'm going to move in with him by the end of the month. Really? That's wonderful. Olwen reached over to hug her friend, spying both her and Elijah's necks before the realization hit her. Holy shit, you two marked each other. Stella's smile turned sheepish as she nodded. Yeah. Just last night actually. We had the talk with each of our parents about us moving in together, and I guess after we came to our decision, one thing led to another at his house. But rest assured, the marking was also a mutual decision. Olwen wasn't one to judge her friend's choice, and Beta Elijah was a good man. Stela was fortunate indeed to have him as her mate. Well, congratulations on making it official. Olwen grinned, and then turned to shake hands with Elijah. You both must be really happy. Elijah nodded as well with a similar blush that nearly covered all his freckles. It was almost surreal to think that he had still been waiting for his mate when Olwen first arrived at the pack. Yes, we'll slowly move her things to my home. I'm currently setting up her room. I want everything to be in place by the time she starts living with me. But you have a date to prepare for. Stela said warmly, lightly grabbing Olwen by the shoulders and walking her back into her house. Go get dressed, Landon did say he would come and pick you up. Okay. Olwen laughed. See you guys later. All the best for your date. Elijah called out. Olwen went back into her home and changed into the dress Alpha Landon and Stela had gotten her, accessorizing it with a pair of small flower earrings and some light makeup. She did her hair into a French braid and carried a stylish sling bag before wearing a pair of brown boots at the front porch, her suitcase by her side. The sound of a car engine startled her as it rumbled closer to the house, and she looked up to see Alpha Landon step out a sleek black sports car. He was dressed in a polo t-shirt and jeans, and his hair was in its natural messy form. She'd mentioned previously that she liked seeing his hair as it normally was, and Olwen was flattered that he had taken her words to heart. It was the same reason she had chosen to braid her hair. It was the same hairstyle she now recalled she had worn the night of the function when they met. It seemed Alpha Landon noticed too, and he approached her with a soft smile on his face. You brought your car here? Olwen observed. The blonde nodded, putting his hands in his pockets. I don't usually have days off in my schedule, but there's nothing happening this week that requires my immediate attention, and my Beta, Delta and Gamma have agreed to help me out if anything happens while we are away. So he watched her face carefully for a reaction. I've decided we take a drive into the nearest human town. The last time I had a clear opening in my duties it was a nice change of pace. Olwen's eyes widened and she thought this over for a while. As an Omega, she had never ventured beyond the main territory of the wilds. She had heard that humans were basically what would be left if she had Opal somehow taken away from her. Some wolves thought humans were weak, pathetic and simple-minded creatures because of this, but Olwen had always been curious. What was it like not to live in packs? With no voice in their head guiding or talking to them, no shifting, and no fated mates. Humans could choose whoever they wanted to end up with, and she supposed there was good and bad. Relationships for them sounded more like trial and error processes, whereas as a wolf, the moment you met your fated you had that lifelong partner. But it also meant that in some way, humans could form connections again and again, with varying depth. Once a wolf lost their fated, usually no connection could ever come close. At that gloomy thought, Olwen decided not to think about it for now. I've never been to a human town before. I don't mind going. Landon grinned, clearly excited as he jerked his head in the direction of his car. Hop in. Once Olwen had piled in her small suitcase in the back of the car, the blonde walked over and opened the door for the passenger side. Thanks. She sat inside, taking a moment to marvel at the interior of the vehicle, as Landon got back into the driver's seat and slowly reversed the car out from the residential area. The drive to the town will take us about half a day, with some side stops to refuel and rest, so sit tight. Landon spoke, his eyes focusing ahead, as he drove out of the Moon River Pack. Olwen nodded absently, her mind still bursting with 1,000 questions. Is there anything I need to look out for when in the human town? I mean, I've heard of them before, but I've never thought I'd actually go see one of them. Since it's important not to let humans know about the presence of wolves. Landon pondered for a moment as the car headed down the dirt path through the forest. Firstly, don't let your wolf take control. Since humans don't have wolves, seeing someone's eyes change color or someone shift will probably make them question their sanity. Secondly, avoid using words that only we would know. So for instance, instead of mate, we just have to use the words boyfriend and girlfriend. Right, so I'm your girlfriend, and you're my boyfriend. Exactly. Landon's cheeks tinted slightly pink at how candid her words sounded. He secretly still couldn't believe it himself, that he was dating Olwen now. I think off the top of my head that's about it. We can be ourselves other than that. I'll tell you if I think of anything else. Okay. Olwen nodded slowly, trying to calm the nerves in her body as she stared out at the window. The car eventually turned out of the forest and onto a proper tarred road. After a few side stops to go to the bathroom, refill gas and whatnot, Landon and Olwen arrived at their destination. The place seemed about half the size of the Moon River Pack, and a third the size of the Silver Arrow Pack. Olwen had learnt as a child that when wolves settled around the world all those years ago, they made a mass prayer to the moon goddess to protect them from being discovered by nearby humans, some whom had taken an interest in exploring their territory, whether for adventure or hunting. In return, the moon goddess placed protective wards that stood until this day. The moment any human got curious about the woods, they'd be compelled to turn around and go right back where they came from. From an aerial point of view, it also ensured that the mass areas where wolves lived looked uninhabited. Even if, by some miracle, humans did find the evergreen wilds packs though, they probably wouldn't have stood a chance against all the wolves. After parking the car and checking them both into a nice-looking motel, Alpha Landon brought Olwen to a cafe to eat some dessert before they began to explore the town together. A young woman with the name tag, Zoe, came over to serve them. "Hello and welcome to the Angel's Brew. May I take your orders?" Olwen immediately noticed the way her eyes were looking Landon up and down with undisguised admiration. Immediately, Opal growled in her mind, but remembering what Landon had told her in the car, Olwen controlled herself. Humans had no concept of mates, so the waitress probably wasn't thinking much of what she was doing now. Still didn't make her much more comfortable though. "I haven't decided yet." Landon spoke, smiling politely at the young woman before nodding to Olwen. "If you've made your choice, you can order first." "All right. In that case I'll get a slice of key lime pie and an Earl Grey tea." The waitress didn't even look at her as she took down her order, still smiling flirtatiously at Landon. "And what about you, handsome?" If this girl wasn't a human, Olwen would have gladly allowed Opal to take over right about now. Landon's smile remained polite, his expression calm. He took a look at the menu and then at Olwen. "You know what? I'll let my girlfriend decide for me." The waitress blinked before she took a proper look at Olwen and then at Landon. Oh, girlfriend. Okay." She smiled nervously, looking very embarrassed. Olwen kept her face neutral as well, but had to hide the smugness and joy at Landon acknowledging their developed relationship. Glancing at the menu, Olwen spoke to the waitress. "He'll get the Black Forest cake and a chamomile tea." As the waitress scurried out of sight, Landon couldn't help softly chuckling at Olwen. "Jealousy is almost cute on you." "Ooh. Don't start." Olwen sighed and covered her eyes. Landon gently slipped a finger beneath her chin and directed her face back up to his. "I said almost. You don't have a reason to be jealous of her. She's not you after all." If Olwen wasn't shooting hard eyes at the blonde Alpha right now, then she didn't know what she was doing. Those brilliance blues were similarly fixed right back on hers, and the emotions swirling within them made her heart melt. Their moment was broken minutes later, when a small airplane folded from a copy of the cafe menu sailed onto the table in between them. "Huh?" Landon held up the airplane as a high, adorable voice reached their ears. "Sorry, mister, that's mine." A young girl came over to their table, her hair tied into 2 ponytails with pink ribbons. She looked about 9 or 10. "Oh, no harm done, just be careful, okay kid?" Landon spoke gently, letting the girl take back her airplane. "I will, thanks mister." As the kid scampered off with her handiwork, Olwen's mind had ground to a halt. If she didn't know any better, judging from the dark brown hair and green eyes, she would have thought the kid was Aaron's daughter. While it was true that it could be a coincidence, even in terms of skin tone and facial structure there were similarities. Are you okay? Olwen's eyes snapped back to Landon, who was now watching her with some amount of concern. Oh, I'm fine. Landon looked as if he might say something else, but the subject was soon diverted as the waitress returned with their food. Deciding it was probably nothing, Olwen didn't think about it for the rest of the day. So how exactly does reading these labels work? The Alpha frowned, turning over a ball of cotton and acrylic yarn in his hands. The sight of the taller and more built figure holding a yarn ball was almost comical, but Olwen held back a snicker to speak. That number represents the yarn size. Like there's light, worsted, bulky, and all that. They correspond to a size of a knitting needle, or a crochet hook which the manufacturer recommends you use if you make something with their yarn. Aha! Landon nodded slowly, as if she'd just spoken to him in another language. Olwen couldn't blame him. He'd tried to explain how soccer worked to her a few dates ago, and she hadn't really understood either. She did appreciate how much he seemed to enjoy it though, and right now, accompanying her to a craft store and helping her choose some yarn was all she could ask for. Considering anything like crafting or flower arranging or sewing was sometimes stereotyped to be solely Omega hobbies in the Silver Arrow pack. She was fortunate that the Moon River pack didn't encourage, and in some cases even broke that sort of image. What about that bright pink yarn over there? It looks nice and vibrant. Landon gestured to a shelf. Olwen went over to check the label. Good eye. She grinned and showed him the printed text. But its official color is fuchsia. They like naming their yarn really fancy words, huh? Sometimes. Here, guess what the color of this yarn is called? Olwen held up another yarn ball. Landon studied the shade for a moment before he spoke. Coral. Nope, label says blush pink. Damn it. Landon exclaimed as Olwen finally started to laugh. When they returned to the motel after exploring the various locations in town, it was 11. Both Landon and Olwen were looking forward to a good night's sleep. They would only have a few more hours the following day before they would have to return back to the Moon River pack, after all. As they entered their motel room, Olwen finally noticed the two king-sized beds that were separated by a dresser. To her embarrassment, a brief feeling of disappointment flashed through her before she turned back to Alpha Landon. Wouldn't single beds have been more affordable? Too cramped? Landon chuckled, crossing his arms and raising an eyebrow at her. You haven't seen the way I sleep. I used to fall off the bed a lot when I was a kid. Giving the blonde an amused smile, Olwen headed over to unpack her suitcase and find the clothes she would change into after showering. As she headed past Alpha Landon, her arm brushed against his, and suddenly his scent flooded her brain. By the moon goddess, Olwen had to pause, as she felt a light shudder go through her body. And from the way Landon had stiffened up with his breath quietly hitching, she wasn't the only one who felt it. With her heart thudding in her ears, she didn't say a word and hurried over to retrieve her clothes from the suitcase, along with her toiletries. Do you want to shower first? Landon asked, his voice awkward and quiet. I'm in no hurry. You can go ahead and use the bathroom now. Oh, sure. Thanks. I shouldn't take too long. Olwen managed, trying to hide how her voice was shaking. She was about to carry everything to the bathroom before she paused in her tracks, contemplating her choice before she spoke again. Maybe it would be faster if you joined me. She asked softly, not turning around to face him. There was a long period of silence in the room, and for a moment Olwen thought she had gone too far. She was on the verge of trying to come up with an excuse or joke to laugh it off when Landon's voice came from behind her. If you want me to, then sure. Give me 5 minutes. His voice was gruff. Olwen managed a small nod and then walked the rest of the way into the bathroom. She could feel the red water pounding in her ears, as she quietly laid down what she'd brought into their proper places. Her toothbrush and toothpaste above the sink, the clothes on the rack, and the shampoo, conditioner, and body wash all in the small shelf in the corner of the shower. Quietly pushing the door so that only a gap was left, she didn't want Landon to think she'd changed her mind after all. Olwen undressed and stepped into the shower, her heart still hammering at an insane pace. Acting on autopilot, her hand stretched out to turn on the shower, adjusting the temperature until it was nice and warm. Stepping back beneath the water as it poured down, Olwen took a moment to slowly inhale and then exhale. It had been almost 6 months since she'd last been intimate with anyone, and she wondered how out of practice she was. Even then, she had only been with Aaron. They were each other's firsts for everything, he had said, but Olwen wondered, with a grimace of disgust, how true that had actually been. "Why are you thinking of your ex-mate at a time like this?" Opal said. "He means nothing to us." Olwen sighed, tilting her head back beneath the shower so that the warm water was able to reach her face. "It can't be helped, Opal, he was the last and only wolf I've ever been with. What if I mess this up?" Opal would have responded, but Olwen was then brought out of her thoughts by the sound of the shower door opening and then shutting again behind her. Less than a moment later, the scent of forest after rain filled the air around her, as a pair of strong hands gently gripped her waist. Olwen's breath caught in her throat, as she felt the Alpha's body lightly press against hers from behind, Landon leaning his head down to whisper into her ear. "You're beautiful." Thanks." Olwen replied, her eyelashes fluttering as she sensed Opal purring and whining. Hearing Landon speak like that made her body burn with need, her wolf desperately trying to claw her way out. Landon turned her head back slightly and leaned down to press his lips to Olwen's. It was brief and just lips upon lips, but it held back all of the desire he'd been harboring for her, and sent a rush of warmth through both their bodies. "Last chance, Olwen," he murmured, his blue eyes ablaze as they rested on her. "If you don't actually want this, or have changed your mind, you have to tell me now." Olwen met his eyes and nodded slowly but firmly. "I do want this, Alpha Landon. I want to be with you." She saw the heat flare in the blonde's gaze before he swallowed thickly. "Then hang tight, because once we start I can't promise I'll be able to stop." "I don't think I'll need you to stop," Olwen murmured, reaching up to slide a hand around the back of his neck. With that, Landon let out a groan and crashed their mouths together, sending the rest of the night into a complete blur. They did not do any sleeping for another 3 hours, and as she came down from her final peak of the night, and collapsed in one of the beds, Olwen found her throat hoarse from crying out her Alpha's name. The culprit rolled off to lie beside her and then wrapped his arms around her, catching his own breath as well. She could feel his heartbeat as they lay together, bodies covered in sweat that were gradually evaporating into the cool air. "Get some sleep," Landon murmured, kissing the back of her ear. Olwen sighed softly as she breathed in his scent again, reaching out to switch off the lamp. "Good night, Alpha Landon." "Good night, Olwen." In the darkness, illuminated only by the streetlights outside the motel window, Olwen closed her eyes and slowly allowed the cradle of dreams to take her. As she drifted into slumber, a satiated Opal stirred just slightly within, the soft murmur of a single word. Mate Chapter 20 Hearsay. Olwen winced as she awoke. The first thing she saw the ceiling light of the motel, and the sunlight almost making the curtains glow. She briefly wondered why her body felt sore before memories of the previous night hurtled back to her, and she blushed. She turned, seeing Landon still fast asleep next to her in the bed. Their first intimate time had been perfect, and even now, the sight of the Alpha with his tousled hair, and their legs tangled together in the blanket made her heart sore. "Mate, wait, what?" Olwen stared at Landon, and then lightly touched her neck. They hadn't marked each other yet. It was far too soon, and if they had she would have remembered. "Opal? Mate?" Opal called out again, her tail swishing madly. "I can smell him." Alpha Landon is our mate. Olwen was about to refute the wolf, but couldn't. Landon's scent was engulfing her just from this proximity, and it made her lose her train of thought. The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. But it couldn't be. Chosen mates didn't feel the same things fated mates did. Neither of them had each other's mark, and somehow after their first time together, it was like everything about him, his scent, his looks, his aura in general, had been dialed up to 11. Olwen had to hold back Opal from attacking the alpha in bed. Just what in the world, mate? A low growl came, startling Olwen. Her eyes snapped back to stare right into Landon's, his of which were now yellow. My beautiful mate. Larkin. Landon's body said huskily, pulling Olwen into his arms and inhaling her scent. The she-wolf hissed as their skin made contact, sending sparks all over her body. What in the world was happening? Landon. She gasped, as Lark kissed his way down her neck, reaching and passionately mouthing the area where her mark was supposed to be. He emitted another low growl that sounded incredibly possessive. Olwen felt her eyes flutter as she let out a soft moan, but panic soon began to set in as she saw fangs beginning to protrude from the alpha's mouth. Landon, snap out of it. Instantly, Landon's yellow eyes returned to their normal shade of blue, and he jerked himself away from her with wide eyes. Oh goddess. Olwen, I am so sorry. He rasped, his chest heaving. He sat up slightly, concentrating and catching his breath until his fangs had sunk back in. I don't know what got into Lark. He paused and then looked back at Olwen in surprise, confusion and an amount of joy. Alpha. Olwen spoke cautiously. Lark is saying you are my mate. Landon spoke quietly, gaping at her. I know. Olwen replied softly. Opal is saying it too. She is. Landon's eyes flickered to her neck as well. I don't understand. How dash? Both of them very well knew they'd already met their fated mates, and the pain that seared through their chests when the rejection process was carried out was too visceral to forget. How could this feeling return to them with another wolf? Opal was howling with joy. She'd already wanted Landon to be Olwen's mate beforehand, and the sudden appearance of a fated mate bond only made it better. She saw the way Landon bit his lip as her eyes flashed from grey to blue. But second chance mates don't exist. Olwen spoke dumbly. And yet. Landon inhaled before deciding to climb out of bed, gathering his clothes from the floor. Olwen had to look away just to prevent Opal from making her pounce on him. I'll ask Beta Elijah and Stela to look it up once we get back to the Moon River Pack. He stammered. His eyes were carefully avoiding hers, but flashing from blue to yellow and back once again. We should get dressed. Olwen could only nod and turn away, attempting to focus on locating her clothes rather than her now fated mate's muscles, as he pulled his shirt back over his body. Breakfast and then the ride back to the Moon River Pack was a little tense. Olwen had to wrestle over control with Opal constantly. Her wolf already had been impatient waiting for Aaron to mark her, and now with Landon it was worse. And from the way Landon's hands were gripping the steering wheel, and how his blue eyes were staring just a little too hard at the road ahead, he wasn't faring much better with Lark. Every brush of skin, even accidental, drove both of their wolves wild. Even though they had been dating a month, and had already been interested in each other before that, they still thought it better to not move too quickly with one another. After all, they'd both had their fair share of grievances that should have made them despise the mate bond, and they wanted the marking process to occur once they were comfortable enough. In order to try and divert both their minds, Olwen cleared her throat. So how many other human towns are there around the wilds? There's several. Landon answered without missing a beat, his body relaxing slightly. The town we just left was the safest one though. Especially after the rogue attacks. Some of the rogues who survived went to live in nearby areas, blending among humans. Olwen felt the fear welling up inside her, as she was reminded how both her parents had died by a rogue's hands. Oh? It's highly rumored that there is an underground black market in one of these towns as well. Landon recounted, as the car sped on. Started by rogues. A lot of illegal substances that wolves shouldn't be in possession of, like drugs or poisons. It's beyond the pack's jurisdiction, but we try our best to keep a lookout in case it is smuggled into the wilds. Suddenly Olwen wasn't too sure whether she'd chosen the right topic to switch to. That's actually related to one of the things I tasked Kale with working on. Landon added with a bit more enthusiasm. A system that will help detect any of those substances within or around our pack. Ah? Olwen nodded at this. Thanks for giving Kale some pack responsibilities that suit him. Back in our old pack, Alpha Bradley and his own dad wrote him off since he wasn't interested in fighting. Fighting isn't the only thing one can do to protect the pack. Landon said with a shrug. I guess your old Alpha must have been caught off guard when Kale hacked his son's emails and sent them to everyone else, huh? Olwen chuckled. She could still recall the pride in Kale's eyes when he told her what he'd done in full detail. Yeah. Stela and Kale already told me what happened after that, but sometimes I wish I didn't leave my pack, just so I could see the look on Alpha Bradley's face back then. Landon laughed a little in return, and the rest of the car trip was spent in a comfortable silence. After arriving home, Alpha Landon headed off to brief Beta Elijah and Stela on what he needed. He gave her a soft kiss on the forehead before going off, shuddering a little as he inhaled her scent. Don't let our mate leave. Opal whined. As much as Olwen wanted him to stay, she knew they needed some time to adjust to this new development. Olwen decided to try and help in some way by heading to the library and attempting to look up some information about any second-chance mate bonds. But after 2 hours of poring through the library books and archives and the online kiosks, there was no factual accounts that existed of second-chance mates. She sighed and sat down in a beanbag chair, deciding to take a break after staring at the screen for too long. Getting another mate bond after breaking the first one was impossible. When she had rejected Aaron, she'd done so, accepting the fact that if she ever found love again, it wouldn't be the same. In that way, she thought her relationship with Landon was deeper. He hadn't been thrown with her because of the mate bond like Aaron had, they'd actually had more time to know each other, to spend time together, to actually develop a connection before becoming mates. Thoughts ran in her brain. What if Alpha Landon and her had only been drawn to her all this time because of the apparent mate bond? What if their relationship hadn't been as genuine as she thought? No, fated or not, Olwen recognized that Landon had sincerely taken interest in getting to know her over the past few months. She'd also gotten to know him more, first as her new Alpha, and then her friend and now mate. It was a more natural progression that a mate bond might have compressed into a week. Perhaps it was a second-chance mate bond that only manifested after they slept together, which also didn't make sense since she'd felt the build-up beforehand. But if this was a second-chance mate bond, did Aaron and Rian have second-chance mates the same way she and Landon had? What if Kylie was actually Aaron's second-chance mate? The thought in itself was repulsive. Excuse me, Miss Olwen. Olwen looked up as a small child, about 7 probably, came towards her clutching a book with a slightly timid expression of his face. Our storyteller came down with a fever, so she can't ready the story to us today. Can you? The woman looked behind the child to see a group slowly gathering behind him, all of them watching her with shy and equally nervous expressions. Deciding she could use a break from all the searching, Olwen smiled warmly at them and accepted the book from the child who had approached her. Of course. I'm not much of a storyteller, though that's okay. The young boy spoke with a toothy smile. We just like hearing the story. Olwen glanced at the book cover, a simple children's story about a wolf who became friends with a wolf from an enemy pack. If it was an adult novel there would probably be more drama and conflict, but this was a children's story where everything was just solved with friendship and peace and love. If only real life were that simple. Looking at the young kids who had all gathered to sit on the carpeted library floor in front of her, she began to read the story aloud to them. Olwen had left the library and was on her way home when she received a mind link from Josh. "Olwen, can you come to my house? There's something I might need your help with." "All right, on my way." She headed down the path to Josh's house. She'd been there a few times since he was her friend's brother's mate now. "Olwen." The Gamma opened his door and gave her a nod, his eyes showing gratefulness and a hint of apprehension. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "What is it?" Well, he leaned forward slightly. "If you're not comfortable with her you can leave, but Elise is here." Olwen raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Elise?" "Yeah." Josh quietly closed the door behind him and stepped out of his house, talking in a low voice. "She showed up here a few hours ago with a suitcase. Apparently her parents kicked her out, and no one else she knows in the pack will take her in." "Do you believe her?" Josh paused thoughtfully. "Oddly enough I do, though her track record is still something to be wary of." Josh said, "I'll talk to Kale, but I'm planning to just let her stay the night at least." "Well, why did you ask me here?" Olwen asked. "I was hoping maybe you could find some common ground with her and calm her down." Josh admitted. "I've tried comforting her, but she seems out of it. I know Elise isn't exactly the most likable she-wolf in the pack, but it might do her some good if you talk to her. Of course, if you don't want to talk to her, or she doesn't listen to you, it's not your fault." Olwen frowned in thought. She hadn't interacted with Elise at all since that day at the boutique. That silver dress was still hanging in her closet. "I'll go talk to her a little." Josh relaxed slightly. "Thank you. If you need any assistance you can find me." He opened the door and led Olwen into his home, all the way to the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Sure enough, as Olwen pushed the door open, there was Elise, sitting on a mattress in the middle of the room. She didn't seem to notice as Olwen entered, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, her platinum blonde hair a frazzled mess. It was a strange contrast to how she normally looked, the girl hugging her knees and her eyes glazed over and staring straight ahead. Gently, Olwen settled beside her. "Hello, Elise. Are you all right?" At her words it was as if Elise was shocked out of some trance, and she blinked and looked at her. "Oh, hello, Olwen. Is what Josh said true? Did your parents kick you out?" There was a moment of hesitation before Elise's eyes, red and puffy, dropped listlessly to the ground. "Yeah? Why?" Olwen hadn't ever seen Mr. and Mrs. Ainsworth in person, but she'd heard of how much they loved and spoilt their only daughter. Elise's voice sounded almost emotionless and cracked. "I disappointed them. I couldn't find a worthy mate. They wasted all these years taking care of me." At this, Olwen couldn't help the concern that welled up in her from the Omega's tone. "Is that why you were chasing Alpha Landon all this time?" Elise had the decency to look ashamed at that question, still not daring to look at her as her face turned red. "It's complicated. I have the time," Olwen said gently. She still wasn't entirely trusting of the woman, but she was curious to hear what led to all this. Giving her an uncertain expression, Elise inhaled softly and began to talk. "When I was younger, everyone praised me for how pretty I was. It was to the point that some started saying I would be the perfect mate for Landon. And I know this isn't an excuse, but I started believing it myself. I let my parents think I was going to be Landon's fated. But you weren't," Olwen said slowly. Elise shook her head. "My parents were devastated when Landon's 18th birthday passed and nothing changed between us. They started planning to send me away to another pack, and even approached Alpha Wendell with suggestions to have me mated off to other upcoming alphas or betas. A shudder of disgust went up Olwen's spine. It was one thing to treat omegas like they were fragile, but it was another to treat them like tradable commodities. Alpha Wendell never entertained them though. He approached me himself and assured me that he would never allow such agreements. Olwen couldn't help recalling the kind, friendly older man she'd met since coming to the Moon River Pack, and felt both relief and admiration for the now retired Alpha. Fortunately, that phase didn't last. Because as you know, Alpha Landon was yeah. Olwen nodded sadly. I was still fearful of my parents finding some way to trade me off to another pack, so I started pursuing Alpha Landon again. I had to keep trying for them, so I was determined to wear Landon down somehow. Perhaps when I was finally mated to our Alpha, and bearing his children, my parents would be proud of me. I see. Olwen didn't know what to think of all this yet. Then I hope this isn't a silly question, but when did you start pursuing Beta Elijah? When you showed up. Elise answered candidly. The first time I talked with you, I saw the way Landon looked at you when you came into his office that day. I knew I had no chance. Maybe my beauty meant I was worth becoming a powerful wolf's mate, but I didn't want to do it by stepping in between others' love. So I moved to Beta Elijah. He wasn't mated yet, and second in command. I was hoping in a way to appease my parents for my failure with the Alpha. That could explain in a way why Elise had initially refused to accept that Elijah was mated to Stela. He was her final chance. I tried going around to relatives, some friends I used to have back in the day, but they are either mated or want nothing to do with me. Elise confessed. They think I'll either seduce their mates or somehow prevent them from saving themselves for their fated ones. Her eyes filled with tears and indignation, her voice. I know I flirt a lot, B, but I've never dash. I'm still dash. Her voice shook as she tried to wipe the tears from her eyes. I don't blame them, naturally they'd think I'd sleep around, she sniffled. What if I find my fated mate, and they hate me for what I've been doing? What if I don't have a mate at all? Olwen listened patiently, and gently raised a hand to rub the woman's shoulder. You shouldn't think like that, your mate is out there, somewhere. You just need to be patient and wait, they'll meet you when the time is right. She spoke softly. Olwen did feel bad after hearing more about Elise, but this was starting to echo something else way too much. She'd comforted Kylie like this too, naively in the dark of how she was screwing her fated mate the whole time. But what if Elise was actually bearing her soul? But I'm a terrible mate, Elise whispered, her voice trembling again. They are going to think I'm a SL, don't. Olwen said, soft but firm. Your fated mate will love you. And if they don't, that's their fault for judging. You have so much more worth than just being the trophy mate. You're a capable she-wolf, Elise, you just need to realize it. There was nothing but sniffles and some quiet sobs for a while before Elise spoke again. How did you do it? When your ex-mate cheated on you and you had to reject him and leave the Silver Arrow Pack, you were able to live as a rogue for 3 months before arriving at the Moon River Pack. How were you able to push on after losing everything? Elise actually sounded curious, and so Olwen just decided to be truthful with her, omega to omega. Because I hadn't lost everything. I still had myself, my strength and my own determination to keep staying alive. And I had Opal. A small smile came to Olwen's face at this. We worked together to survive in the wilds. I partially owe it to her that we managed to hold out. Elise gazed at her in muted awe before she looked guilty once more. I haven't been cooperating with my wolf at all. She buried her head in her hands. Ember has always told me about how what I'm doing is wrong and that my parents shouldn't be projecting any aspirations on me to such an extent, but I never listened to her. It's not too late. Olwen assured her with a soft, encouraging smile. Think about it this way: now that you don't live with your parents, you don't have to worry about trying to land yourself a worthy mate bond for them. Take this time to find yourself, who you really are. I guess I could try thinking like that. Elise agreed nervously. But I've lived with them, and followed their wishes all my life. I don't know where to start. Start with what you know you love to do, Olwen said. Or if you don't, explore the pack and try new things. You'll find a new purpose aside from trying to social climb for your parents. Elise looked down, thinking over her words. She wasn't crying anymore, but the tear tracks still stained her face. I guess I could try, she said finally, meeting Olwen's eyes. That's all you need, Olwen replied with an encouraging smile, gently allowing the blonde to lean on her shoulder. They settled into another comfortable silence before Elise murmured something. Thank you. I know you didn't have to do this. I'm sorry that I was a bit of a bitch to you when we first met. Olwen felt a small smile grace her lips. No problem, and no worries. I've encountered worse. Elise cracked a small sad chuckle at that. That's not a good thing. It really isn't. Olwen made up her mind. She wasn't the same naive lunatic of the Silver Arrow pack anymore, but neither would she turn away another pack member who needed her help. She would do her best to help get Elise back on her feet. But rest assured, if she tried anything, Olwen would not let it be. Alpha Landon, you should check your phone. Landon opened his eyes from his attempt at sleeping and calming his wolf from howling for Olwen. What is it, Beta Elijah? The Silver Arrow pack. Landon rolled over and took his phone, finding a new notification from the Evergreen Wilds bulletin. He took a moment to scan the post. Beta Elijah, add this to the agenda for tomorrow. Tell Delta Cassidy to help draft a response, and that the Moon River Pack will graciously accept the hosting duties for the Evergreen Pack's function this year. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.